First of all, I'm Denny Skirvin, and this is Dr. Alan Davies, and we're here to talk about Dr. Davies' new book, The Backside of the Firefight, which is a memoir of his days in Vietnam, 68, 69, as a thoracic surgeon at the 2nd Surgical Hospital in the 27th.
That's right.
Yeah.
2nd and the 27th.
And 68 was the big hot year for Vietnam, that's for
Yep.
sure.
The Big Tet.
Tet Offensive. So we're gonna talk about a number of things. Dr. Davies says there are a number of other interviews out there.
Yes.
Philly Factor did one, and Epic Times
Times,
did
yes. Brandon Fallon.
Brandon Fallon, and those videos are available online. We're going to put this one up online too, but we're going to cover some things that not necessarily covered in those interviews. So I think this is going to be real interesting. What do you mean by the backside of the firefight? And many of the viewers may not even know what you're referring to here as a firefight.
Well, a firefight can be a big battle or a little battle, and it happens when two opposing forces sort of meet. That can be expected or many times unexpected.
The ambush.
The ambush. Yeah. The ambush.
Yeah.
So the firefight is when the boys start shooting one another, and killing becomes the main object of the day. Yeah. So that's a firefight, Dennis.
Okay, and the backside.
The backside is the unknown side. I was always fascinated by the term the backside of the moon. Nobody sees the backside of the moon, but it's there. And nobody really saw the backside of what happened after the firefight when the dust-offs came in and picked up our wounded and brought them back to the hospital. That was the backside of the firefight, where the doctors and nurses tried to put together what everybody is tried to tear asunder.
Well, that was the side that all the soldiers in the field tried to, didn't want to see, so to speak.
Didn't want to see,
but they tried to avoid.
But many of them told me they knew that if they got hit, they'd be really taken care of well.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And
I can attest to that.
Yes.
And we'll remark about that in a little bit. He says, how did your medical training? You had extensive medical training, that's for sure, and you studied under some of the very best world-renowned surgeons. But how did all that training help you to cope with some of the horrific injuries that you saw in Vietnam, the guys that came in as patients?
Well, I guess, Dennis, you can't really be prepared, but I was as prepared as you possibly could be for what I saw. My generation of surgeons grew up of thoracic surgeons, grew up in places like Philly and Los Angeles, New Orleans, where there was a lot of trauma, a lot of gunshot trauma, a lot of knife trauma. And so we saw quite a bit of trauma in our training. And the way we handled it may have been a little bit different from the classic ways of handling it. There was certainly a great evolution at the end of my training with the advent of grafts, vein grafts that were used to revascularize the arteries of the heart. That was a tremendous breakthrough in surgery of the arterial system, and that alone enabled us to save multiple limbs that in prior years would have been amputated.
Yeah.
And the use of large amounts of fluid to resuscitate shock really came from the use of the heart-lung machine in open heart surgery. So there was a tremendous amount of learning that we had pre-Vietnam that really helped us in the field.
Well, a lot of soldiers, a lot of wounded soldiers are very thankful for what you did and what your colleagues did there in Vietnam.
Right.
Because they certainly wouldn't have made it if they didn't have that kind of a care when they got back to the rear area hospitals.
To the backside of the firefight.
Backside of the firefight.
Yeah. Right.
To mention an episode with a replacement that came in, another doctor that came into your unit, came into the hospital. And it wasn't long after he was there that you and others discovered that this new doctor had a very, very high opinion of himself and a very low opinion of the soldiers he was treating.
Correct.
So I'm just curious. That had to be a bit of a rarity.
Danny, that certainly was. That was the only, this guy was the only instance that I saw of anything like that. This gentleman was a regular Army trained surgeon, and he, for some reason or other, was very dissatisfied being put in Vietnam. I really couldn't understand that part of it. Mm-hmm. But he made a couple of errors that we tried to correct nicely, but he continued to persist in that he was going to sort of learn on all the soldiers, and that these guys were almost submortal for some reason or other. Well, he got booted out and sent a little battalion aid station out in Quin Yan.
Yeah. Well, it's a very interesting story on how he got booted out, and but it's well described in the book, and I think readers will get a big kick out of that.
I think so. It was. It had to do with that day that I really pushed to have him booted out. Was the first day that our new commanding officer had arrived, and so he had me wanting to kick out one of the regular Army surgeons, and it was his first day of command. So, but interestingly enough, one of the scrub nurses who helped me at the second surge wound up back in San Antonio and meeting this our new CO, and had told her, she had told him to look me up. And he said, I didn't think that this was how I was going to look you up, and it worked out pretty good.
That's a pretty amazing story.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of amazing little occurrences in your book, that's for sure.
Yeah, it seemed that all kinds of things happened, and you wondered whether they were meant to be, or how they came together. Just as you and I passed in the night at the Second Surgical Hospital.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell that story?
Oh, that's a story there. I was an infantryman in Vietnam, 1968, and I served with the 198th Light Infantry Brigade, and we were just south of Chu Lai. And Dr. Davies' hospital, 2nd Surge, and the 27th were located in Chu Lai. So anyway, long story short, we're on a patrol in January of 68, and we ran into a bad situation, and a bunch of my fellow soldiers were wounded, some very seriously, and we had the dust-off come out, and in the middle of all that, the dust-off pilots flew out, and they were able to get the wounded on board. I was one of them, and flew us back to Chulai. And we went right to Dr. Davies' hospital. So I always thank Dr. Davies for his service back then, and especially the time that he took care of my group of soldiers. All these men, there was about 15 or 16 of us came in, and the hospital was it was just the epitome of efficiency, the way they ran it. I still remember it. I wasn't out. I wasn't knocked out or anything. But I remember it well, and I remember how professional everyone was and the great care we got. And I think the medical profession, the medical soldiers in Vietnam, they sort of got short shrift on the accolades. And it didn't come later, but it was well-deserved what they did. And they did it on a day in and day out basis, 24 hours a day. It was pretty remarkable.
Well,
thank you, Doctor.
Well, okay, Dennis. You may be wondering why I have my Phillies hat on today.
Yeah. We should explain that too. In the second well, you tell this story.
Okay. Well, all of our doctors and nurses wore service fatigues. That was our standard unless we were in the operating room. And you can imagine when 15 or 20 wounded soldiers come in, some with minor wounds, some with absolutely major wounds, and some that probably shouldn't have come in because they were going to die from their wounds. Somebody had to run the show and assign different surgeons to different wounded soldiers. Mm-hmm. And as you can imagine, that could turn into a real circus if there was nobody in command. Well, what we did was one of the nurses from South Philly had a Phillies hat, and Eileen said, "Why don't we give the Phillies hat to the surgeon who's in charge of triage that day, so everybody will know who's in charge and he can tell them what to do." So that was an absolutely great suggestion. The Phillies hat went on, and he who had the Phillies hat had absolute control over the situation. He would say, "Davies, you take those two guys and you handle them." And he'd say, "Al Tassi, you take that guy over there. And Bob Cox, you got those 3 or 4 guys over there that had minimal wounds." Mm-hmm. And nobody talked back. Nobody ever talked back. And some very difficult decisions had to be made, such as, we don't think we can help this soldier, so we're just going to have to take care of the ones we can fix. Those decisions were really never questioned, because the next day you're going to be wearing the Phillies hat and you had to make those life and death decisions.
Yeah. So you didn't second guess people and
no, that's why
followed the command.
That's why the Phillies hat was on the guy who was in charge, and it rotated amongst the 5 surgeons who had to bear the responsibility of making those life and death decisions.
Yeah, that's pretty remarkable. But it was a good way to keep order and command and keep it going smoothly.
Absolutely.
As smoothly as possible.
Absolutely. It made a possibility of good follow-up and triage out of chaos.
Yeah, order out of chaos.
Yeah.
Dr. Davies, we talk a little bit about the last 2 chapters of the book. One of the chapters, these 2 chapters, they kind of diverge from the format of the book in the sense that it's all memoirs.
Correct.
But when we get to the last 2 chapters, you switch and make some significant commentaries about things that pertain to Vietnam. And one of them you bring up is the way the soldiers were ill-treated when they came home, when they returned home. And we all know that that's a fact. It's well recorded. But I'm just curious of how you think that kind of treatment played into the PTSD epidemic that returning soldiers faced when they came home and years after.
Right. Well, to start out the comments, Danny, I think that some, but certainly not all, of our citizenry were involved with the ill feelings. There were an awful lot that were patriots also and supported us. But the anti-Vietnam feeling was certainly there, and the people who had it were very vocal. My first experience with it was when I got back and was taking, I had scheduled to take my boards in thoracic surgery 2 days after I got back from Nam. I had flown back to SeaTac in Washington, and then had to go down to Oakland to take the thoracic boards. Yes, and when I reported in the night before, I had my khakis on, and they told me that I was not allowed to take my boards with the military uniform on. Well, it was either put my bathing suit on and do it, or so I went out.
You had no other clothes.
I had no other clothes. I barely had my DOP kit with me, and so I went out and got a very loud Hawaiian shirt and put it on over my uniform, and several of my examiners, my 4 oral examiners, had been in the service and apologized tremendously for what the board had decreed.
That was basically just a snub against
just
anything military.
Absolutely anti-military. I don't know if it was just anti-Vietnam or just anti-military, as you say. And when I got back, obviously, to Wilmington, I experienced it almost on a daily basis. If I'd be introduced to another surgeon or someone in the community, and they mentioned that I had just returned from Vietnam, there was almost a physical drawback.
Recoiling.
A little recoil. Yeah. That all I could hear was body bags and baby killers, and they had no idea that we were the baby putter backers, and took care of a tremendous amount of the Vietnamese citizenry who were hurt.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, in the book, most of the cases that I describe are taken care of Vietnamese nationals who were caught in the crossfire.
Well, that was pretty amazing, and that was kind of startling to me too. As a soldier, Vietnam, I didn't realize that our hospitals in the rear took such care of the wounded, even NVA and VC.
Yeah, we took care of the VC, and in the book there's a chapter on a VC soldier who was left in front of the hospital one night by his 4 of his comrades, and he was in active tetanus, which is a very rare thing in the civilized world today. Yeah. And we took him in, and we actually saved his life, and he turned into be a very valuable asset for our side, because he knew the situation on the ground with the VC in our province, and was able to give us a tremendous amount of information that I'm sure saved a lot of American lives.
Well, one good deed.
One good deed. That one went,
leads to another, as they say.
That one helped.
Yeah, absolutely. The next question I wanted to ask you, Dr. Davies, is centered around the last chapter of the book. And in that chapter, again, as I said earlier, you depart from the memoirs and get into some really good commentary. And you mention a couple times throughout the book, you mentioned a picnic table that was just outside the hospital, right outside the hospital. And
Right.
a lot of times when there was a break in the action there, you would congregate out there with other professionals on the staff, and you would kind of talk about cases that were going on that day, or some of the things that were going on in the war, and
Yeah.
especially about some of the things that were going on back at home at that time, the riots and so forth. And in this chapter, you use that picnic table format, that town hall discussion, and you project it into if they were to take place, if one of those discussions were to take place today,
Yes.
and the contemporary problems that are going on now. And you paint a pretty good picture about what's happening in America right now. And there's a lot of worry in there as well.
Right. Well, we didn't have a real mess hall to sit down and eat and talk, but the picnic tables was between the two dormitories that where we each had a room, and there was always somebody off duty and somebody on duty, and we'd always wind up sitting at the picnic table and talking about something maybe funny or something maybe good, or that Jimmy was really feeling bad because this soldier died, and one of the nurses was all upset because
Yeah.
something happened bad, and we used to talk about just about everything under the moon at the picnic table. And we had a couple of I had a couple of good buddies who were fighter pilots with Mag 12 and Mag 13.
The Marines.
And both of these guys were top guns in their class, and as I wrote the book, and as I sort of got to the end, I started to think about the fact that we all were very open, and when we talked to one another, and there was a lot of compassion shown, and we supported one another tremendously. The other thing that I thought about in that last chapter was the fact that we were really muzzled when we came back from Vietnam. We were looked on as maybe the Confederate soldiers would be looked on, or Attila the Hun's boys,
Yeah.
through no fault of our own. So I thought I would try to reconstruct what would happen if we talked about things at the picnic table today. And as I thought back, a lot of the fellas and girls aren't with us any longer. But I knew them very well, and I know how they would react to what's going on today. I know the two fighter pilots, they became top guns because they were the last airplane flying. Everybody else was down in smoke.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, and the top guns weren't chosen by DEI. And I know that may offend some people, but I got to say right now, the muzzle came off me. And that's why I can say it. And
Yeah,
I guess
those pilots were chosen because of their skill. And their
because
merit.
absolute skill, absolutely.
Yeah.
And when you got somebody operating on you, and when you got somebody fighting for you, and landing a jet on a pitching deck of an aircraft carrier, you want the best guy going.
Absolutely.
So the The problems today I see are somewhat similar to Vietnam, but extremely more deep and divisive. I realize that some of the things that happened in Vietnam that I thought were correct, after 55 years, they weren't correct, and vice versa. My very good friend who died on the way home from Vietnam due to a plane crash at Chulai, Dr. Drews, had 4 little girls. He was from Princeton, New Jersey, and he died after serving a year in Vietnam and never got back home.
Yeah.
The family, I was really psychologically damaged by that whole thing. The family wanted nothing to do with the military, and I couldn't imagine why they didn't want me to bring that body home. But now, 55 years later, I'm thinking maybe they were right in some ways. The military itself was doing its job, but our leaders at the time of Vietnam made grave errors. Decisions were made in Washington that should have been made on the ground in Chulai, as you know. So I think that's why I wrote that last chapter. It unloaded my soul in many ways, and it makes me feel as though our country is on the brink of being different from what it was meant to be. However, being an optimist, as I always have been, and knowing that vein grafts could be used to salvage a blown apart artery, maybe what our country needs right now, and hopefully will be a vein graft to put the 2 severed ends of it together.
Yeah, pulls us all back together
and
again.
pull us back together and let both sides live.
Yeah. Well, you cover that well in the book, and you cover that well in that last chapter, and as you know, and as I said, the last chapter is a kind of
A little departure
from the memoirs, but the comments that have come in about those last 2 chapters are kind of overwhelming and very supportive.
Yeah.
And all the readers very much appreciate what you had to say in those last 2 chapters.
Well,
as well as the entire book.
Sure. But I'm surprised. I didn't really mean to write those 2 chapters when I started out. They weren't in my little they're in my little diary in my head about what I was going to write.
I can't tell you how many people that I've talked to that come up to me and say, "Hey, I read Dr. Davies' book. It was terrific, tremendous." And then they grab me and say, "I love the last 2 chapters too."
Yeah.
You know.
I've had that.
Yeah.
I've had that, and from little ladies of 80 years of age, and from big, strong 21-year-old guys. Yeah.
So readers, or viewers, pay a special attention to the last 2 chapters. I think you're going to enjoy them. Dr. Davies, we're kind of getting to the end now. I was wondering if you wanted to say anything about what are the points or the main point that you want readers to take away from your book.
Right. Well, Denny, the backside is what I wanted to describe, and I wanted them to know the dedication of the doctors and the nurses that participated in the care of the wounded and what it was like for them. If you're in the field and your buddy gets killed and then maybe a week later somebody else get killed. We dealt with death every day, and there wasn't a day go by that somebody didn't die in our situation. And the dedication and the actual physical ability the girls worked, the nurses worked 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week for a year.
Wow.
Okay?
Yeah.
And we didn't work shifts per se. We worked on a call basis, and sometimes the call would be 2 days. So that was one of the big reasons I wrote the book. And the other reason was, and this is in retrospect, was to put down on paper what I thought about what happened there, the mistakes that were made politically by our government, and they're recounted in the book. And that being absolutely mirrored today by the multiple mistakes that we are doing in foreign policy and in domestic policy also.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't agree with what's going on, and the only difference between me then and now is that the muzzle is off, and the Rottweiler is running free. Okay.
The hound's on the loose.
Yes.
Well, that's a good thing. But in your point about letting people know about what the medical teams went through,
Yes.
is a really good one, because it really came across to me. As I said earlier, my experience in the second surge was after I was wounded. I came back there within 24 hours. I was gone. I was out. They shipped me off to the USS Sanctuary Hospital ship.
Yeah.
But I remember all the trauma that was going on in there when I was
Right,
there.
and the best part of it, you were fixed.
Yeah, I was fixed, and I ended up going back to the field. But it opened my eyes. It really opened my eyes to what the medical teams did and what they sacrificed. I mean, during TET, in the book, you talk about how you were at Quezon, and 72 hours with no sleep. You were the only surgeon on there, just a handful crew.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing what the sacrifices that the medical teams went through. And that comes out very well in the book. And for that reason, I think people definitely need to read this and learn about it. It's history. Doctor, you want to tell everyone, all of our viewers, where they can get a copy
Okay,
of your book?
the backside of the Firefight is available on Amazon, and the cost is $10. And I just want to tell you where those dollars are going to go. They're going to go to an outfit called CASH, Canines Assisting Service Heroes, which is a program that trains dogs for veterans that have severe PTSD or amputees, etc., things like that. It costs about $20,000 to train one of these dogs. It takes about a year. So if you like vets and you like puppy dogs, buy a copy of the backside of the Firefight.
Yeah, it's going to a wonderful cause, and the group, the CASH group, the Canines group, is in Dover.
In Dover, yes.
Dover and
It's a side splinter from the VFW down in Dover.
yeah, Dover, Delaware. That is.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that wraps things up, and encourage everyone to get a copy. And when you're finished with it, write a review, stick it on Amazon. That always helps.
Yep.
And know that the money's going for a great cause. Dr. Davies, thank you very much. Thanks for your service, and welcome home, brother.
Okay, welcome home, Denny. Okay.
God bless you.